So, a little background. I've been married to my wife, Alice, for 8 years. We met in college, hit it off instantly, and the rest is history. At least that's what I thought. I always believed we had a solid relationship. We had our ups and downs like any other couple, but I never doubted her loyalty or love for me. I work in sales, and my job requires me to travel for business trips frequently. Nothing too crazy, just a few days here and there. Alice always seemed to be okay with it. She'd tell me how much she missed me while I was gone, and I'd get home to her hugs, kisses, and a welcome back dinner. That was our routine, and I trusted her completely. About 2 weeks ago, I had to go on a business trip to Chicago. It was supposed to be a quick 3-day trip. I packed up, said goodbye to Alice, and headed to the airport. Nothing out of the ordinary. The first couple of days went smoothly. Work meetings, client dinners, the usual. I didn't notice anything off. Alice would send me a few texts during the day, asking how things were going, telling me about her own day. There was nothing unusual in our conversations. The second night was where things started to shift. I had just finished a late dinner with some clients and decided to grab a drink at the hotel bar before heading to bed. As I sat down, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Greg, one of my closest friends from back home. We hadn't talked in a while, so I figured it was just him checking in. But when I opened the message, it wasn't the casual, "Hey, how's it going?" that I expected. Instead, it read, "Frank, I need to talk to you. It's about Alice. Call me when you get a chance." My stomach dropped. It was so out of character for Greg to send something like that, and my mind started racing with possibilities. I immediately excused myself from the bar, went up to my room, and called him. When he answered, his voice was tense, which only made me more anxious. "Greg, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Look, Frank, I don't want to get involved in your business, but I think there's something you need to know. But I want to be sure before I say anything." He was being cryptic, and it wasn't helping my anxiety. "What do you mean? Just tell me. Is Alice okay?" There was a pause on the other end. Greg sighed deeply before responding. "I'm not sure how to say this without making things worse. I'll call you tomorrow with more information. But keep your head up, man. It's going to be hard." I felt my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was that supposed to mean? I tried pressing him for more details, but he wouldn't budge. He said he didn't want to speculate until he knew for sure, but his tone alone told me something was seriously wrong. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind was in overdrive, and I couldn't stop thinking about what Greg had said. I was frustrated and confused, trying to piece together what could have possibly happened. Alice had never given me any reason to doubt her. She was always affectionate, always the loving partner I knew. But now I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, I went about my workday as usual, but I was distracted. My phone was in my hand more than it should have been, waiting for a follow-up text or call from Greg. But the whole day passed, and nothing came. By the time my meetings were over, I was getting irritated. I called him again, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, asking him to call me back, but he didn't. When I got back to my hotel room, I FaceTimed Alice, just like we always did when I was away. She answered quickly, and there she was, smiling, looking the same as ever. I stared at her face, searching for something, anything that might explain Greg's strange message. But she was just Alice, sitting in our living room, telling me about her day. She mentioned something about having coffee with one of her friends and how she'd been binge-watching a show we liked. Normal, everyday stuff. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I played along, pretended everything was fine. But in the back of my mind, Greg's warning kept replaying. As soon as we hung up, I felt the weight of uncertainty settle over me again. By the third day, I was supposed to be wrapping things up and heading home. But instead, I was anxiously waiting for Greg to follow through on whatever he had found out. Around noon, just as I was about to head into my final meeting, I got a text from him. It simply said, "Frank, I have answers. Call me when you can." And that's when everything started to unravel. I excused myself from the meeting, telling my coworkers I needed to step out for an important call. My hands were shaking as I dialed Greg's number. He picked up almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting for me. "Greg, I'm free now. What's going on? What did you find out?" My voice came out more frantic than I intended. There was a long pause on the other end, followed by a heavy sigh. "Frank, this isn't easy for me to say, and I'm sorry you have to hear it like this, but Alice has been seeing someone else." The words hit me like a freight train. I stood there in the hallway, speechless, as my brain tried to process what I just heard. My mouth went dry, and a wave of nausea washed over me. What do you mean? What are you talking about? Greg." My voice cracked. I didn't want to believe it at first either, man, but I saw it with my own eyes. A couple of days ago, I went out to grab lunch at this restaurant downtown, and I saw Alice there, with another guy. They were sitting in a corner booth, and it was pretty clear they weren't just friends. They were holding hands, laughing, being all close. He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. At first, I thought maybe it was some misunderstanding, but then I saw them kiss. The ground seemed to fall out from under me. My whole body went numb as Greg's words echoed in my head. Alice had kissed another man. Alice, the woman I had trusted more than anyone, was cheating on me. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, barely able to form words. "Are you sure it was her? I mean, it could have been someone who looked like her." "Frank, I know Alice. We've all been friends for years. There's no mistake. It was her." Greg's voice was soft but firm, the kind of tone someone uses when they're delivering bad news they wish they didn't have to. I leaned against the wall, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. How could she do this to me? Why? We weren't perfect, but I never thought we were in a place where she would do something like this. "Who's the guy?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't recognize him, but he looked younger, maybe early 30s. I didn't stick around long enough to get more details. "I'm sorry, man." I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples, trying to stave off the overwhelming surge of anger, betrayal, and confusion that was building inside me. I wanted to scream, cry, throw something, anything to release the pressure that was building in my chest. But all I could do was stand there, in the cold, clinical hallway of a corporate building, grappling with the realization that my wife was unfaithful. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I finally managed to ask. "I didn't know how, Frank. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. I couldn't just drop something like that on you without knowing it for sure. I only found out a couple of days ago." I sank down onto a nearby bench, the cold reality of the situation pressing down on me. "What am I supposed to do, Greg? What the hell am I supposed to do?" Greg's voice was quiet. "I don't have an easy answer for that. I wish I did. But you deserve to know the truth, and now, it's up to you to decide where to go from here." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I couldn't handle any more conversation. My thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions, none of them making sense. How had this happened? Had I been so blind? I replayed the past few months in my mind, looking for signs I might have missed. But nothing stood out. Alice had always been affectionate, always seemed happy with me. Or at least she pretended to be. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the floor. My flight back home was scheduled for the following morning, but now the idea of going home felt wrong. I couldn't face Alice. I couldn't walk through the door, pretending everything was normal, knowing what she had done behind my back. The thought of seeing her now made me physically sick. After a while, I made my decision. I wasn't going home. Not yet. Couldn't. I wasn't ready to confront her, and I needed time to process what Greg had told me. I wasn't sure what my next move would be, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't just walk back into our house and pretend nothing had happened. I grabbed my phone and sent a quick text to Alice. "Work's running late. I'll be staying an extra day. Don't wait up for me." I didn't want to give her a reason to suspect anything was wrong. Not yet. I needed time to figure out what to do next. With that, I extended my stay at the hotel, booked a new flight for the following day, and sat alone in my room, my mind spinning with questions and doubts. How long had this been going on? Was it a one-time thing? Or had she been seeing this guy for months? And most importantly, how could I ever trust her again after this? That extra day in Chicago felt like the longest day of my life. I wandered the streets, aimlessly moving from one block to the next, my mind stuck on replay, going over every detail of my marriage with Alice. I wondered how long she'd been with this other man. Had our entire relationship been a lie? Or was this something new? I was in a mental fog, lost between disbelief and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. I couldn't bring myself to go back to the hotel just yet. The thought of sitting alone in that room, with nothing but my thoughts for company, was unbearable. So, I found a quiet bar a few blocks from the hotel, sat down, and ordered a drink. Then another, and another. It wasn't enough to numb the pain or stop my mind from racing, but it dulled the edges, just a little. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a message from Alice. "Hope everything's okay. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Let me know if you need anything. Love you." That single text made me want to throw my phone across the room. Love you. How could she say that so casually? How could she pretend everything was fine, while knowing she had been with someone else behind my back? The anger surged up again, a red-hot fury that made my hands shake. I put my phone face down on the bar and ordered another drink. Hours passed, and I didn't even realize how late it was getting until the bartender announced last call. The reality of my situation was crashing down on me, and the alcohol wasn't helping as much as I'd hoped. I stumbled back to my hotel, collapsed onto the bed, and passed out almost immediately. The next morning, I woke up with a splitting headache. The sunlight streaming through the curtains felt like a personal attack, but the pain in my head was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. I stared at the ceiling, unsure of what to do next. I had to make a decision, and soon. I checked my phone. There were a couple of missed calls from Alice and a few more texts asking how I was doing. She seemed genuinely concerned, which only made things worse. I couldn't understand how she could be so two-faced, acting like the loving wife while sneaking around behind my back. As I sat there, something inside me clicked. Couldn't go back. I couldn't face her, knowing what I knew, and I sure as hell couldn't pretend everything was okay. I pulled out my laptop and started looking up divorce lawyers. Felt surreal typing those words into the search bar. But I had to be practical about this. If Alice had betrayed me once, there was no telling what else she was hiding. I needed to protect myself. I found a lawyer who specialized in quick, discreet divorces. Their office wasn't far from my hotel, so I made an appointment for later that day. I figured I could meet with them, get the process started, and then decide how to deal with Alice. I spent the rest of the morning trying to keep myself busy. I didn't know if Alice was suspicious yet or if she was still blissfully unaware of what I knew. Either way, I wasn't ready to confront her until I had everything in place. When I arrived at the lawyer's office, I was greeted by a no-nonsense woman named Karen. She had a calm, professional demeanor that immediately put me at ease. After I explained my situation, she didn't seem surprised. She had probably heard stories like mine 1,000 times before. "We can handle this quietly," Karen said, her tone steady. "Since there are no kids involved, it should be relatively straightforward. I'll need some more details about your financial situation, property, and any assets you share with your wife. Do you have a prenuptial agreement?" I shook my head. "No, we never signed one." "I didn't think." I trailed off, feeling foolish. Back when Alice and I got married, the thought of ever needing a prenup seemed ridiculous. I loved her and she loved me. We were supposed to be together forever. How naive I had been. Karen nodded. "That's fine. It might complicate things slightly, but we'll work through it. I'll draft the necessary papers, and we can discuss how to proceed with serving them to your wife. Do you have any idea how she might react?" I hadn't even thought about that. How would Alice respond? Would she be surprised? Angry? Would she even care? I realized I didn't know her at all anymore. The woman I thought I married was a stranger to me now. "I don't know," I admitted. "I really don't." Karen gave me a sympathetic look. "We'll handle it carefully. But just so you know, once we start this process, there's no turning back. Are you sure this is what you want?" I paused for a moment, staring down at my hands. Was this really the end? Was I ready to throw away 8 years of marriage over this betrayal? A part of me wanted to confront Alice, to demand answers, to make her explain why she had done this to me. But another part of me, the part that was tired and hurt beyond measure, just wanted it to be over. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to beg her to stay or try to fix something that was already broken beyond repair. Yes, I said quietly. This is what I want. Karen nodded and slid a stack of papers across the desk. Sign these, and we'll get started. With shaking hands, I picked up the pen and signed my name. Each stroke of the pen felt like the final nail in the coffin of my marriage. When I was done, I handed the papers back to Karen, and she gave me a reassuring smile. We'll take care of everything from here, she said. You've made the right decision. I didn't feel like it. I didn't feel like anything at all. Leaving the lawyer's office felt like walking away from a life I no longer recognized. The finality of my decision settled in as I strolled back to my hotel, the weight of everything pressing down on me. There was no going back now. I had signed the papers, and soon, Alice would be served with divorce papers, her world likely crashing down the same way mine had. Once I got back to my room, I threw myself onto the bed and stared at the ceiling, my mind still spinning. Part of me felt relieved that I had taken action, that I wasn't sitting around wallowing in the pain. But another part of me was terrified. Terrified of what came next, terrified of facing Alice when she found out. I wondered how she would react when she got the papers. Would she deny everything? Beg for forgiveness? Try to explain away her betrayal? I didn't know if I could even stomach listening to her excuses. I had always thought of Alice as the love of my life, the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. Now, she was the person I least wanted to see. The next day passed in a blur. I stayed in Chicago, keeping my distance from home and letting the process unfold. Every time my phone buzzed, I tensed up, half expecting a call from Alice, but it never came. A text here and there, nothing unusual, as if she were oblivious to what was happening behind the scenes. It made me wonder how she could act so normal, as if nothing was wrong. Was this the same woman who had kissed another man in public, confident that I would never find out? By late afternoon, I couldn't avoid it anymore. I had to check in with the lawyer. Karen had said she would let me know when the papers were served, and I needed to know how things had gone. I called her office, and after a few rings, she picked up. Frank, the papers were served this morning, Karen said calmly. It was handled discreetly. Your wife received them at your home. I can't speak to her reaction, of course, but the process is officially underway. My heart pounded in my chest. The moment I had been dreading had arrived, and now Alice knew. The papers were in her hands, and there was no hiding from the truth anymore. Thanks for letting me know, I muttered, hanging up the phone. Now, it was only a matter of time before Alice reached out. The longer the silence dragged on, the more anxious I became. My phone remained still, no calls, no frantic messages from her. I checked it every few minutes, expecting to see her name pop up, but nothing. Later that night, as I sat in the quiet of my hotel room, my phone finally buzzed. It was Alice. The screen lit up with her name, and my heart raced as I debated whether to answer. But I wasn't ready for a conversation. Not yet. She left a voicemail, and after a long hesitation, I hit play. Frank! Her voice cracked as soon as she spoke my name. I don't understand. I came home and found the papers. What's going on? Why are you doing this? There was a long pause, filled only by her shaky breathing. Please, call me. We need to talk. I love you, Frank. We can fix this. Whatever this is, we can fix it. Please, just call me back. Her words stabbed at me like a knife. She sounded desperate, confused, but I knew I couldn't give in. This was bigger than a misunderstanding, bigger than a mistake that could be swept under the rug. She had betrayed me, and there was no coming back from that. The trust we had built over the years was shattered, and no amount of pleading could change that. I didn't call her back. Couldn't. Instead, I let the voicemail sit there, unanswered, as I tried to clear my head. The next few days were filled with more voicemails and texts, each one more frantic than the last. Alice didn't know why I was divorcing her, and part of me wanted to confront her, to scream at her for what she'd done. But another part of me didn't want to hear her excuses, didn't want to let her back in with whatever lies she might try to spin. Finally, after nearly a week of silence on my part, Alice sent one final message that broke me. "Frank, please, if this is because of something I've done, just tell me. I'll make it right. I'll do anything. Just come home. I don't understand why you're doing this. I love you. Please, don't throw us away like this." I stared at the screen, my hand trembling. All the anger and hurt I had buried deep inside came flooding back in an instant. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had to let her know why I was walking away from our life together. With shaking hands, I texted her back. "You want to know why? Ask the guy you were kissing in that restaurant. I saw the pictures, Alice. It's over." I hit send, my heart pounding as I waited for her response. It didn't take long. My phone buzzed almost immediately. "Frank, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't kissed anyone. Please, just talk to me." I clenched my jaw, furious at her denial. I wasn't going to play this game. I wasn't going to let her twist the truth. "Greg saw you, Alice. He saw you with another man. Stop lying to me." The response came quickly. "That's not true. I wasn't with anyone, I swear. Greg must have made a mistake." A wave of frustration washed over me. She was still lying, still trying to weasel her way out of it. I couldn't handle it anymore. I needed to be done with this. "It's too late. The divorce is happening. Don't contact me again." I turned off my phone, unable to deal with the back and forth any longer. I had made my decision, and no amount of denial from Alice was going to change that. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. For days, I kept my phone off, avoiding any potential messages from Alice, hoping that she would finally understand that this was over. But a part of me, the one still reeling from the betrayal, wondered if I had done the right thing by cutting off communication so suddenly. What if she really didn't know what I was talking about? What if Greg had somehow been mistaken? The doubts crept in, unwelcome but persistent, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. I tried to bury myself in work, spending long hours in meetings, answering emails, and pretending like my personal life wasn't in complete shambles. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that this situation wasn't as clear-cut as I wanted it to be. My mind kept drifting back to Alice's texts, her confusion, her pleas for an explanation. Could she really have been so clueless? Was she genuinely surprised? Or was she just a master manipulator, playing innocent while covering up her lies? I needed to talk to Greg. I needed to hear it from him to make sure that what he saw was real, that there had been no mistake. So one evening, after another long day of avoiding my thoughts, I called him. Greg answered on the second ring, his voice casual, not expecting the serious tone in mine. "Hey man, how's everything? How was the trip back?" I didn't bother with small talk. I went straight to the point. "Greg, I need to ask you something about what you told me last week. Are you sure you saw Alice with another guy? You're absolutely positive?" There was a slight hesitation on the other end of the line, just long enough for my anxiety to spike. "Yeah, Frank. I'm pretty sure. It was definitely her. I wouldn't have told you if I wasn't." "Pretty sure?" I asked, my voice rising with frustration. "This isn't the kind of thing you can be pretty sure about, Greg. I need to know for certain. Did you or did you not see my wife kissing another man?" Greg sighed heavily. "Look, I didn't go up to them or anything. I just saw her from across the room. She was with some guy and it looked close. I'm sorry if I've caused any confusion, man, but I swear, I wouldn't have brought it up if I didn't think something was off." I closed my eyes, rubbing my temples as a headache began to form. This wasn't the confirmation I needed. It was all too vague, too unclear. Greg had seen something that might have been nothing, and I had jumped to conclusions. I had already signed the divorce papers, sent them to Alice, and torn apart my life based on a situation that wasn't fully concrete. "So, you didn't actually see them kiss?" I asked, my voice calmer now but filled with tension. "No," Greg admitted. "Not exactly. but they were close and I just assumed. I'm really sorry, Frank. I didn't mean to. I cut him off, not wanting to hear any more. It's fine, Greg. I appreciate you looking out for me, but I need to figure this out on my own. We ended the call, and I sat there in silence, my head spinning. What had I done? Had I blown up my marriage over a misunderstanding? Over a glimpse of something that might not have been what I thought it was? For the first time since all of this started, I found myself doubting everything. I had been so sure, so convinced that Alice had betrayed me. But now I wasn't so certain. Could it be that I had ruined everything based on a false assumption? The guilt hit me hard. What if Alice had been telling the truth all along? What if I had walked out on her, divorced her, and shattered our lives over something that never actually happened? That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. My mind raced with questions and doubts, the weight of my decisions pressing down on me. I had been so consumed by the idea of Alice's betrayal that I hadn't considered the possibility of being wrong. By morning, I knew I had to confront her, not just to finalize the divorce, but to get answers, real answers. I couldn't live with the uncertainty hanging over me, eating away at my sanity. I needed to face Alice and find out the truth, whatever it was. I turned my phone back on, bracing myself for the barrage of missed messages. Sure enough, there were dozens of texts from Alice, each one more desperate than the last. She had called me repeatedly, left voicemails, and even sent emails, all of them pleading for an explanation. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I packed my bags and booked a flight back home. It was time to face the music. The flight back felt agonizingly long, but by the time I landed, I was resolute. I would go to the house, confront Alice, and finally get to the bottom of what had happened. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I needed to hear it from her, face to face. When I arrived at the house, I stood outside for a long moment, my heart pounding in my chest. Everything looked so normal, so familiar, yet everything felt different. The home that had once been a place of comfort now felt like the site of a battlefield. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was quiet, almost eerily so. Alice wasn't in the living room or the kitchen, and for a brief moment, I wondered if she had left, if maybe she had given up on trying to reach me. Then I heard the sound of footsteps coming down the stairs. Alice appeared at the top of the staircase, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her eyes red and puffy from crying. When she saw me, she froze, as if unsure whether to approach me or stay where she was. "Frank," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're home." I stood there, unable to speak for a moment. All the anger, the hurt, the confusion swirled inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold and steady. Alice nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I know. Please just tell me what's going on. Why are you doing this? Why are you leaving me?" I took a deep breath, ready to finally confront the truth. Alice's question hung in the air between us, her voice filled with desperation. As I stood there, the tension between us palpable, I felt the weight of my decision settle over me. There was no turning back now. I had to face this head-on, no matter how painful it was for both of us. I motioned toward the living room, and Alice hesitantly followed, sitting on the edge of the couch. I remained standing, too restless to settle in. The room felt charged, like the calm before a storm, and I had no idea how this conversation would unfold. "You want to know why I'm doing this?" I said, my voice low but firm. "Why I'm leaving? Fine, I'll tell you." Alice's eyes widened, her fingers gripping the edge of the couch. She looked terrified, as though she already knew something terrible was coming but couldn't quite brace herself for it. "I know what you did, Alice," I said, the words bitter in my mouth. "I know about the affair. You cheated on me." Her reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of denying it or exploding in anger, Alice's face crumpled. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head, looking more confused than anything. "What? No, Frank, I didn't cheat on you. I swear, I would never. Don't lie to me," I snapped, cutting her off. Greg saw you. He saw you with another man. You were out, kissing him in public like I wouldn't find out. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I wouldn't figure it out eventually? Alice stared at me, her tears now flowing freely down her face. She shook her head violently, her hands trembling in her lap. Greg, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Frank, no, you've got it all wrong. I wasn't. There was no affair. I swear to you there's been no one else. Please, just listen to me. I felt my chest tighten, the fury inside me warring with the doubt that had been simmering ever since Greg's vague explanation. But I had seen the texts, the pleading, the confusion. Was it possible that I had been wrong? That this whole time I had been jumping to conclusions without hearing her side? You expect me to believe that? I asked, my voice shaking with emotion. After everything, you're going to stand here and tell me you didn't cheat? That Greg's lying? Or that he saw something else? Alice wiped at her face, her tears mixing with her frustration. I don't know what Greg saw, but he's wrong. Frank, you have to believe me. There's been no affair. I don't know what's going on or why you think this, but I love you. I've always loved you. Her words cut deep, and I felt a strange pull between anger and sorrow. Could it really be true? Could I have ended our marriage, signed the divorce papers, and destroyed our lives over a misunderstanding? I didn't know what to think anymore. Then who was the guy, Alice? I demanded. If there's been no affair, then who were you with? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with fear, and that was when I saw it. Guilt. Not the kind of guilt that comes from infidelity, but something else, something darker. It was like she was hiding something, but not the thing I thought. Tell me the truth. I pressed, my heart racing. Don't lie to me, Alice. Who was he? Alice took a deep, shaky breath, her hands clutching the fabric of the couch as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she whispered, "It was my brother." Her words hit me like a freight train. "Your brother," I repeated, confused. "Yes," Alice said, her voice cracking. "My half-brother, Frank. You didn't know about him because I never told you. I'm sorry. I should have, but I didn't know how. We were estranged for years, and he recently came back into my life. That night Greg saw me. We were meeting up, trying to reconnect after so long apart. I swear to you, Frank, it wasn't anything inappropriate. He's my brother." I stood there, my mind spinning, trying to process what she had just said. A brother? A half-brother she had never told me about? It was so far from what I had expected that I didn't know how to react. Was this the truth? Could this explain what Greg had seen? It certainly added up, but why hadn't she told me any of this before? "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice breaking with exhaustion. "Why keep something like that from me? We're married, Alice. We were supposed to share everything." Alice nodded, her face a mixture of guilt and pain. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I should have told you, but I didn't know how to explain it. Our family situation is complicated, and I guess I was ashamed. I didn't want you to think less of me or get involved in the mess. I never thought it would come to this." The room was silent except for Alice's quiet sobs. I didn't know what to feel. Relief that she hadn't been cheating? Anger that she had kept such a big secret from me? Or heartbreak that our marriage had come so close to unraveling because of a misunderstanding? I sat down heavily in the chair across from her, my hands covering my face. This wasn't what I had expected. None of this was. For the first time in days, I felt something other than rage, confusion, sadness, maybe even regret. I had been so sure, so certain that Alice had betrayed me, and now I wasn't sure of anything anymore. Alice sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, waiting for me to say something. But I didn't know what to say. I had already made my decision. The divorce papers were sent. We were at the end of the line. Could we ever go back to how things were before? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I looked up at her. "I don't know what to think, Alice. I don't know what's true anymore." She looked at me, her eyes pleading, but I shook my head. "I need time," I said, standing up. "I can't make sense of this right now." Without another word, I walked out of the house, leaving Alice behind. The cold night air hit me as I stepped outside, but it didn't cool the storm of emotions swirling inside. I had thought that knowing the truth, finally confronting Alice, would bring some kind of closure. Instead, it only opened up a new wave of confusion. Her revelation about a half-brother I had never heard of was so unexpected. I couldn't even begin to process it. I walked aimlessly, each step feeling heavier than the last. My mind replayed the scene over and over, trying to make sense of it. Could I believe her? Her story about the half-brother explained so much, but at the same time it felt incomplete. Why keep it a secret? And what about Greg? Had he really just seen them in a moment of misunderstanding? Or was there more that I wasn't seeing? I found myself standing by the edge of a small park, looking out at a playground that was eerily silent in the night. I sank down onto a bench, staring blankly ahead as memories of my marriage flooded back. Good times, bad times, all of it mingling together in a blur of emotions. The wedding, the late-night conversations, the quiet evenings spent watching movies. Had it all been a lie? Part of me wanted to believe Alice. She looked so genuinely broken when she confessed about her brother. And I had never known her to lie about anything big before. But I had already spent weeks convincing myself she had been unfaithful, and it wasn't easy to shake that belief. Trust is fragile. Once broken, it doesn't just snap back into place. It takes time, and sometimes it doesn't repair at all. I pulled out my phone, staring at Greg's number. I hadn't spoken to him since he had dropped that bombshell on me. Part of me wanted to call him, to demand more answers, but what would be the point? He had told me what he saw. Maybe he hadn't known the full context, but it wasn't his fault. I had been the one who ran with it, who let the suspicion grow like a virus in my mind. And now, I had no idea what was true anymore. Hours seemed to pass as I sat there in the dark, the world moving on without me. I had no idea how long I'd been sitting there when my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Alice. "Please, Frank, can we talk again? I know you need time, but I can't lose you like this. I'll tell you everything you want to know. Just come home, please." I stared at the message, my chest tightening. I wanted to go back. I wanted to believe her, to fix everything that had been broken between us. But a part of me also knew that something fundamental had changed. Even if Alice hadn't cheated, the trust had been shattered. How could we ever get back to what we had before? I didn't respond to the message. Instead, I pocketed the phone and started walking again, my thoughts clouded by doubt. I needed time to think, to sort through everything without the pressure of Alice's tears or explanations. The next few days passed in a blur. I checked into a hotel, telling myself it was just for a little while, just until I figured out what to do. But as the days went on, it became harder and harder to even think about going back. Alice's calls became less frequent, and eventually, she stopped texting altogether. I knew I should feel relief, but instead, all I felt was a strange, hollow sadness. One afternoon, I found myself staring at the divorce papers again. My lawyer had been surprisingly efficient, and everything was ready to go. All I had to do was sign. But even with everything that had happened, I hesitated. Divorce was final. Once I signed, there would be no going back. And despite everything, I wasn't sure if I was ready to give up on the life we had built together. But then the doubts crept in. Could I really spend the rest of my life with someone I didn't trust anymore? Wouldn't it always be there? That nagging suspicion, the fear that she was hiding something else? I had thought Alice was my partner, the one person I could count on, and now I wasn't sure. Eventually, I made the decision. I met with my lawyer the following week, the papers spread out in front of me like some kind of cruel ultimatum. As I stared at the document, I felt the weight of the past few months pressing down on me, every moment of doubt, anger, and sadness rushing back. But I knew what I had to do. Without a word, I picked up the pen and signed. It was over. Just like that, our marriage, the life we had spent years building together, was done. The finality of it hit me like a punch to the gut, but I couldn't let myself dwell on it. I had to keep moving forward, even if it felt like I was walking away from everything I had ever known. The next day, I packed up my things. I hadn't taken much when I left, and it didn't take long to gather the rest of my belongings from the hotel. As I loaded the last of my bags into the car, I stared at my phone one last time. There were no new messages from Alice. She must have realized it was over too. As I drove away, leaving the hotel and everything behind, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was sadness, of course, but there was also relief. I had made my choice. I had taken control of my life again, even if it meant walking away from the woman I had once loved more than anything. Maybe someday I would be able to make sense of it all. Maybe someday I would understand why things had fallen apart the way they did. But for now, I was just a man starting over, trying to find my way in a world that suddenly felt so much bigger and lonelier than before.